pretty common for us to see this symbol, right? In church, in Christian culture at large, right? There's a lot of people who wear a cross as jewelry, like a cross around your neck, or maybe cross earrings, things like that. I bet each and every one of you probably has a shirt that somewhere has a cross on it. Maybe from the last D Now weekend, I don't know. We see crosses on Christian apparel. There are crosses in churches everywhere, right? You see them in the lobby. You see them on the altar. You see them walking up and down the pews. You also see them at the top of a church building. Crosses are everywhere in society today. But you see, in Jesus' day, in the first century, this would not have been the case. In fact, in the first century, people would have thought we were absolutely crazy for wearing a cross as a necklace or putting a cross on our phone. Because in Jesus' day, the cross meant something very, very different. You see, for Jesus, when he was sentenced to death by crucifixion, and when he was forced to carry that cross, and when he was hung up on it, and when he eventually died there, for Jesus, first and foremost, the cross meant opposition. The cross meant opposition. You see, the cross in the first century, it was used as an execution tool. Much like you've heard of maybe the electric chair, right? The cross, that was the first century electric chair. It was an execution tool, and it was used specifically to execute the worst type of criminals. Murderers, rapists, right? People who did unimaginably terrible things. In today's society, it might be someone like a terrorist, right? The cross was used to execute the worst criminals imaginable. And Jesus, when he is crucified, he is being treated like one of the worst criminals imaginable. The cross for Jesus meant incredible opposition. The second thing that the cross meant for Jesus was shame. Often what would happen in the process of crucifixion, we read about Jesus and how he had to carry the cross upwards of 7 miles. And during that, you would actually walk through the streets and people would throw things at you, and they would spit at you, and they would hurl insults at you. And then they would strip you of your clothes and hang you on the cross. And the person who was being crucified would hang there, often naked, for hours as people continued to throw things at them and poke them with spears and spit on them. Crucifixion was an incredibly shameful undertaking. And Jesus experienced all of that shame. The third thing the cross meant for Jesus was suffering. You see, the cross, it was specifically designed for the victim to experience prolonged, excruciating pain. Because not only would they take giant nails and put them through your hands and through your feet, but as they put you up on the cross, because of gravity, what would happen is your body would actually start to sag down to the point where you couldn't breathe, and you would begin to suffocate. And so in order to survive, what you would actually have to do is you would actually have to hold yourself up by the nails that are pressing into your hands and feet until you couldn't bear it anymore, and you would let yourself sag. You see, people, when they died on the cross, most of the time, they died of suffocation. Slow, long, painful suffering. And Jesus experienced every bit of it. God didn't lift him out of it at the last minute. Jesus experienced unimaginable suffering. And the fourth thing that the cross meant for Jesus was death. See, the cross, it was not a tool that was meant to torture someone for a while and then let them go. The goal, the sole purpose of the cross was to kill someone. And once you were crucified, once you were hung up on those 2 slabs of wood, you were not coming back from that. And so for Jesus, during the process of his crucifixion, he experienced all 4 of these things. Jesus experienced opposition. He experienced shame. He experienced unimaginable suffering. And he experienced death. That's what taking up his cross meant for Jesus. And so I have to believe that when Jesus says to us, his followers, take up your cross, he is warning us that when we choose to follow him, we can expect to experience those four things as well. You see, when you truly follow Jesus, you will experience opposition. Some of you who perhaps have a relationship with God and are trying to live out your faith in your school, you've experienced that opposition, right? You have a classmate who is really hostile towards your faith. Or maybe some of you don't come from a Christian home and you have parents who don't like you hanging out with your religious friends, right? Or others of you, you're finding yourselves having to separate yourself from a certain friend group because the things they're doing or the things that they're saying, they're not necessarily what God or what Jesus would want you to be doing. You see, when we truly follow Jesus, it often means living in opposition to much of what the world will teach us. And so when we become a disciple of Jesus, we can expect to experience that opposition. And secondly, when we choose to follow Jesus, we will experience shame. And we will experience suffering. Again, maybe for you it comes from a sibling or someone at your school who just relentlessly makes fun of you for what you believe. Oh, you believe that Bible stuff? That's just old stories. How could you be so stupid to believe that? Or maybe, I don't know, for you, maybe it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend, right? Who is forcing you or really calling you a prude if you don't do certain things physically with them that they want you to do. And they're making you feel bad about it. They're saying, oh, you don't care about me. Oh, you don't love me. And you're just feeling incredibly shameful because of it. See, when we choose to follow Jesus, when we choose to be his disciple, the world will often try and shame it out of you. And lastly, when we choose to follow Jesus, we also must follow him into death. Did you know that every single one of Jesus' disciples, except for Judas and John, every single one of them was martyred for their faith? Most of them were killed in the exact same way that Jesus was killed. They were crucified on a cross because they believed in him and because they followed him. And Judas and John didn't get out much better. Judas killed himself because he betrayed Christ, and John was exiled to a deserted island to die there alone. And while this still happens in the world today, right? While there are still places in the world, there are still countries where people are being persecuted and even killed because of their belief. For most of us, pretty much all of us in this room, that's not going to happen to us. No one is going to kill us for being a Christian, most of us. But you see, we still must experience a different kind of death if we are to follow Jesus. The type of death that Jesus calls all of us into is a death to self, right? We talked about this just a little bit earlier today. We talked about how Jesus calls us to put to death the old self, right? Jesus calls us to die, to lose, to forfeit our physical life so that we can receive a new spiritual life in him. And you see, when you choose to follow Jesus, you have to be willing to follow him into that death. You have to be willing to put to death the old self, to die to your physical life. You see, when we truly follow Jesus, that means taking up the cross as he did. When we are truly a disciple of Jesus, we will experience opposition. We will experience shame. We will experience suffering. We need to experience a death. Now, I know what you all are thinking. Opposition, shame, suffering, death. This is very encouraging, Jon. You're really making me want to follow Jesus. I really want to be a disciple now. I love shame and suffering. Yes. Firstly, though, I hope you didn't think I was going to come here and sugarcoat it for you. Like, being a disciple, it has never been easy. And it never will be easy. However, I want to change our understanding of what those 4 things mean really quick. What is vitally important to understand is that amidst this scary, slightly dangerous proposition of take up your cross, right in the middle of that command from Jesus, are actually 2 hopes that we can cling to. The first one is something that we talked about earlier today a little bit. The first is that as followers of Jesus, we can experience opposition, and we can experience shame and suffering and death because we are following a God who experienced it first. This is what makes Jesus, this is what makes our God different than any other God in any other religion. Is that when you experience opposition from people at school or on your team, Jesus knows what that feels like to experience opposition. When you are stuck in shame, when other people are shaming you, Jesus knows that shame. When you experience suffering, Jesus has felt that suffering. No matter what you face in life, no matter how much pain you are going through, no matter how hard the opposition, no matter how deep the shame, Jesus has already gone through it, and you are not alone in it. It's because for Jesus, the cross wasn't the end of the story, was it? You see, for Jesus, the opposition that he faced, it didn't end in opposition. It actually ended in reconciliation with God. You see, the shame of Jesus didn't end in shame, but it actually ended in honor, with him sitting at the right hand of the Father. The suffering of Jesus didn't end in suffering, it ended in peace, bringing an end to the battle against sin. And you see, the death of Jesus, it didn't end in death. They thought that he was done for when he was hung on a cross, but the death of Jesus doesn't end in death, it ends in life, when 3 days later he rose from the grave. And you see, friends, this is the hope we have.